Good morning. Today we begin the book of Deuteronomy, kind of known as the second book of the law. In many ways, this book it's mostly Moses speaking to the people. There are kind of three different speeches that he makes. The first one is in verses or chapters 1 through 5, or the end of 4, and then 5 through 28 is another speech, and then 29 to 30 a shorter speech. And then but this book starts with in the 11th month of the 40th year. So I mean, Moses is reviewing the travel through the wilderness of the people, their continued disobedience of the Lord, and the reasoning again why they traveled for 40 years, and also we're reminded of why Moses doesn't get to enter the promised land. And in what we read today, Moses asks God about that again, and God says, I don't want to hear about that anymore. And it's sometimes our parents would say that to us growing up, or maybe we've said that to our children or to others as well. But Moses is reaffirming the people of Israel, and it's a reminder that the worship of God is to be in this centralized spot. It's the Jerusalem, but they're not yet in Jerusalem. And we hear several references back to Deuteronomy and Deuteronomic law. I don't know how to even say that word, but and to the history of Deuteronomy, of what Moses is telling. So there's a lot of the same stories we've read in Exodus and Numbers, but a little variation. But again, it's that reaffirmation for the people of Israel that, number one, God is with them, that God is faithful in his leadership, and that God continues to provide for his people. And we, and Moses kind of reiterates all of that journey and the battles and all of those times in the wilderness with God leading them. And so chapter 1 begins, these are the words that Moses spoke to all of Israel beyond the Jordan, in the wilderness, on the plain, in the 14th year, in the 40th year rather, on the 11th month, Moses spoke. So it's just before they begin to, this first speech anyway, is just before they begin to inhabit the promised land. And it goes on through that. And verse 6, the Lord God spoke to us saying, you have stayed long enough on this mountain, resume your journey. And it's a reminder that, in this 40 years in the wilderness, the Israelites were, several times in one spot for a length of time, and sometimes back into that same spot again for another length of time. God says in verse 8, I have set the land before you. Go, take possession of the land that I swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So it's a reminder of the promises that God has made to the ancestors of these, like Abraham to begin with, that I will make a great nation of you. And to Isaac and to Jacob again, that they would be led to the promised land. They would be a free people. And verse 9, I am unable to myself to bear you. I mean, God was so fed up so many times with the people, and remember that, he spoke to Moses, I'm going to consume these. I'm just going to destroy them. I'm going to start over with you. And Moses would plead for the people. And, but it's just those reminders. And then as we go on through chapter 1, Moses reminds them of how they were to choose like one out of each of your tribes, to assist Moses in settling disputes. And, and then, there were 70 that were chosen, and they would settle disputes. And if they weren't able to figure it out, well, then they would bring the major ones to Moses. And so it was just this reminder of how God was providing leadership, providing direction for them, providing a way of conflict resolution, and we all need conflict resolution in our lives. There's no question about that. And then when we get to verse 19, it's, we got to the hill country, which here's this land which the Lord our God is giving to us. And then the reminders of how, Moses sent and asked, can we pass through your land? No. Can we pass by your land? No. We'll come and we will buy the water from you. We will buy food from you. Just, let us pass through. And how this, in verse 22 and up to 25, the spies go in and check out the land, and Moses is telling them, we sent these spies. They checked out the land and they came back and you refused to go, because some of the spies said back, oh, they're so tall and they're so powerful. We'll never be, And so again, this was one of the reasons and times that God was upset with the people. Verse 26, you were unwilling to go. You rebelled against the command of God. You grumbled in your tents, and God heard that. And I take that as a reminder that God hears us today, and sometimes we moan and we grumble and complain. And, I've heard many people say over the years, and I've said it myself, complaining doesn't do any good, but we do it anyway. But, God knows what's on our hearts and on our minds that way. And it's just a reminder, like verse 34, God heard your words. He was wrathful and swore, not one of you of this original generation that was over 20 is going to enter the promised land. That's what we come, other than Caleb and Joshua. Those were the two of the 12 spies that went in that said, yeah, let's go. If God's going to lead us, they were faithful to God. And Joshua, of course, is the one that Moses turns the leadership of the Israelites over to when he no longer is going to be with them. And so then the end of chapter 1, talks about the Amorites who lived in the hill country and how they chased you and when you returned, you wept before the Lord, and the Lord wouldn't pay attention to you because you'd been unfaithful, because you'd been disobedient. You had gone and you were told not to. So it's, you don't just go off on your own without God telling you to. I mean, this is what, you take God's leadership and take God's advice, his commands seriously. Chapter 2, we journeyed back in the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea and skirted Mount Seir for many days. And then verse 3, you skirted this hill long enough, head north, and charge the people you're about to pass through the territory. And then it's, these 40 years the Lord your God has been with you, you have lacked nothing. And again, that reminder of God's providing, of God being with them. We passed by our kin, the descendants of Esau who lived in Seir, and you're not going to have that land because God gave that to the descendants of Esau. And then they went by another land, and you're not going to have that land because God gave that land to the descendants of Lot. And they're good lands, but they're already designated by God for these specific people. And it goes on with just talking about all of those things. And then when we get to verse 26 is where, Moses sent word asking, if you let me pass through your land, I'll only travel along the road, and you shall sell me food and water. But, they wouldn't let us do that. They wouldn't allow us to pass through. They wouldn't sell us food and water. And why? Verse 30 says, but King Sihon of Heshbon was not willing to pass through, for the Lord God had hardened his heart. I mean, and we heard that about Pharaoh. We've heard that about other people that, some of these kings and others that were living in the lands where the Israelites were to take possession had, God had hardened their hearts. And this is, in a way, enabling then the people of God, under the leadership of God, to be able to conquer these lands. And the rest of chapter 2 and chapter 3, we get in and it talks about how the Israelites defeated King Sihon, the one that wouldn't let him through, and King Og, and and how this King Og's bed was like 9 cubits long and 4 cubits. I mean, a huge bed, you know, and we still have that bed, you know, the way it was made and stuff, and so it's a reminder that God has led them in battle. God has been faithful in his promises, and they have begun to take possession of some of the lands. And then the last thing, you know, kind of talks about is where, you know, at verse 23, I entreated the Lord, saying, O Lord, you have only begun to show your servant your greatness. You know, let me cross over and see the good lands. And God says, no, because of your disobedience. And remember, that disobedience was when Moses struck the rock twice rather than spoke to the rock. And so God is faithful to his promises. God is aware of what we do. And, you know, I'm so thankful that we have that belief and trust in a God who is gracious, merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love.